Hello and welcome to our 11th of September 2024 JupyterLab and Notebook or Frontends and Accessibility meeting. I'm Mike and I will be your host today. This is the place where Jupyter contributors can connect to each other and talk with community about Jupyter related topics. If you are new to the call, please introduce yourselves. There is an agenda on HackMD. The link is in the chat. To remind you, this is a Jupyter community Jupyter call, and we follow the code of conduct. I will also drop that in the chat. And let's see what's on the agenda. I think I'm first, so we'll go ahead and get started. I wanted to mention one pull request, which is content providers. And this pull request, also linked in the chat, number 16744, will allow us to remove the RTC colon prefix when using server-side execution or the collaborative mode. I provisionally tagged this pull request for inclusion in the 4.3 milestone because it addresses an issue which was prevalent and frequently reported by numerous users. And since 4.3 seems to be a release where the server-side execution and collaboration are really getting to production-ready state, I think it makes sense to fix that bug as well. But technically, it is tagged as an enhancement because it adds a new API. It enables Jupyter collaboration to fix the underlying issue. Now, there has been 2 previous attempts to solve this, and those pull requests might still live separately because they are attempting to solve other problems at the same time as well. But this one, which in the current state, it adds 2 or 3 new methods to the drive implementation, not to the drive interface. And these methods basically redirect the traffic or offer a way to redirect the traffic from the REST API to a different content provider, which can get the file content and save the file content as needed. I wanted to first highlight that there is this discussion of whether we should include it in 4.3 or not, and then whether there are any objections to the way the implementation is proposed, or specifically about like how should it be documented and whether it should be documented at all. I know there is a very recent discussion. Jeremy suggested that we do document that in the possibly extension points, which seemed like a very good idea, but it seems that David proposed that maybe it's best to not document it just yet, because the details might change us in the future when we might be able to improve that the implementation. So, do we have any thoughts on that?
I think it would be good to at least document any changes from previous versions, because even though I've never met anybody who loves, for example, the RTC prefix or the current architecture, there may be people we don't know who are depending on it. And so like adding to the documentation will at least say, hey, if you notice that this changed in JupyterLab 4.3.0 or whenever this gets released, here's why. And if you have questions, you can ask us here to try to get ahead of the story as much as we can.
Yeah, I also had some questions on that I left on the PR. I think they were mostly for extension authors. So I think up until now, I think the main recommendation for adding extra content was to create a new drive. Even though it's not documented at the moment in the JupyterLab documentation, which is something that, I mean, it should be there anyway. And the question was mostly like, are we going to continue supporting drives? Because if maybe the content providers can do the same, but still using only one file browser and remove all of the issues related to the drive prefix, then maybe we don't need drives anymore. We only need content providers, maybe using the plugin system. And that's why I think having some idea on how we want to move forward with this in the long run, not just for fixing the prefix bug, because it also looks like it's just a bug fix in the end because of the way RTC handles the RTC prefix. It would be nice to have some ideas on what we expect people to do with this new API that is added to the contents manager in the services package, to avoid having someone depending on it in the 4.3, and then if we change something, then having to break that at some point in the 4.x release.
So addressing your previous point, it would appear to me that the drives would still exist in the future because they are different concepts and they enable to provision files and directory structure from a place which might have different rules. For example, it might be read-only or support different set of operations. So I'm thinking like a network drive, a collaborative drive. These concepts seem to make sense to me, and having a barrier in the UI so that they are presented as different file browsers potentially, but that's of course up to the extension's choice. It also makes sense to me conceptually and from the UX perspective, but the content provider it would seem that this concept is focused more on what, for example, server-side extension can read given type of file in a format which is suitable for presenting it to the browser extension. And Jupyter Collaboration is in fact only hijacking this mechanism to enable a bug fix. So I think like this idea of a content provider might not be a direct solution, or is not a direct solution for the RTC prefix. Probably it's just a side effect of it that it will enable it. And that's also something I wanted to draw attention to, because there is a method allowing to register a content provider. And then the selection of the content provider happens based on matching the pattern of the file path. And I'm not quite sure whether this, like the current implementation uses a regular expression. Not 100% sure if this is the way we want to go. So if anyone is interested after hearing this discussion here, please do comment on the pull request.
So from an extension author point of view, let's say I see this and I see that there is the Drive API and now the contents provider API. How do I choose which one is the right one for me? Like that's the kind of documentation I think points that I was referring to, because at first I think it could be confusing, and also it looked like I didn't look at the whole diff, but it looked like if you can swap the REST API part, then does that mean that you can provide your own content provider? and then do anything you want on any path, pretty much. And then you can have some kind of transparent way, or I guess where you would just check the path each time and then do something different based on the path. So you could use the regular REST API, but you could also fetch it from somewhere else, depending on its extension point, but also on anything else, pretty much. So that would be up to the extension, which is why I was wondering, like, since there could be so much flexibility and control from the extension, then do we still need drives after this? If you can just provide a different content provider and do put all of your logic in there instead of a custom drive.
Like it will be technically possible. You're right. I see your point. It might not result in the best user interface, because if two extensions try to register a content provider which does like capture all, like dot star, regular
What happened?
expression, it will be a big conflict. But if two extensions provide separate drives, then these can still coexist.
Yes, but yeah. So then that means there are limitations on how many extensions can add their own content provider. Let's say there is one content provider for loading. Yeah, I think there was this HTML5 mentioned somewhere, but then you have another extension for RTC, or then like what happens in this case?
Yeah, that's
Is it
I'm not sure.
Yeah, is it why we need this rule based on the file path so that the content provider is only, but that's also sounds like it would be nice to give more control flexibility to the extensions and not have to just create one content provider for one type of path. Yeah, the thing I'm thinking about would be like we could, for example, use this in Jupyter Lite, where you would just check the local storage first, and then transparently make requests to a file somewhere else, like a static file, and then you could also have RTC on top of this.
I agree that there is a problem of potential conflicts with this example of HD5 plus RTC. I do not clearly see what could be a solution, but if you have ideas, I would appreciate a comment on that pull request. Okay, so just to time check on the discussion, any other comments from anyone else, or should we move to the next point, just in the interest of time? Okay, so my next point is that there is a number of pull requests on JupyterLab repository and on Notebook as well. And I just want to request that if any of you have got time to help with the review on the pull requests which are there, that would be greatly appreciated, because in the past month it was that there were fewer active reviewers, which is understandable because in this hemisphere where I'm located, there was a number of days off and vacation times. But yeah, we got from 60 open pull requests to 86 again. It would be great to start clearing that off and looking at the backlog as well. Maybe we can do some of that in the meeting today. Okay, next on the agenda is Jason.
Okay, so speaking of pull requests, we have an open pull request in collaboration between the Docs working group and the DEI working group, and I'm in the DEI group, to improve the host guide so that folks who don't often host, like Mike, have additional resources to better be able to serve the community. So we've been working on this for a bit, but it's now ready for review. So if folks want to take a look through it, Mike, you in particular, like once we're done with this, if there's anything that you feel like you would have preferred to have, because you don't host very often, please add comments there. We want to make sure that we make the experience of hosting available to more people to get more people involved with the project. I think that's my only agenda item. Any questions about that?
I have one. So is it going to supersede the guide that we have in Team Compass on JupyterLab repo, or is that
This is
dedicated to community meetings, which happen
So
once in a
the
while?
one on the, I think the one on the Team Compass and the one linked on HackMD are both kind of the same document. So this was something that I adapted from Isabella's work that we've kind of had for a while, but we've been trying to take that document and make a general template that all the subprojects can use and then put it up on docs.jupyter.org. So yeah, this would be the broader, it's just a broader template or guide for the whole community. So I think we could keep or adapt the current one, but they're very similar, closely related.
Yeah, Isabella's work was very informative to for the basis of this pull request. And yeah, it's going to live in the community section on Jupyter.org. Currently, I think we just have been making revisions to that, the community documentation. Let me see if I can get a link and share that. I can also drop that into the notes.
For general awareness, the Docs working group and DEI have been working on this together. The broader plan is to make docs.jupyter.org a shared resource with valuable assets that any of the subprojects can use. So that's the broader idea, is to try to get all of the subprojects to put stuff into the meta docs so that everyone can use those shared resources.
Okay, any other questions on that topic? Or should we move to Gabriel?
Gabriel, you are muted if you're talking.
Oh, just was waiting. So this is just sort of a announcement that there is a vote on JEP for kernel subshells. For a little bit of context, it's primarily intended for when there's like a long running computation on for the kernel main thread, so that you can do some things in parallel or introspect the running process. So that was voted on and merged in. So I guess it's now official, and there is a reference implementation for IPyKernel. My understanding is each kernel has to implement this. It's an opt-in feature, and in order to make it usable for end users, it will eventually have to be surfaced to the UI. Just putting this here just because it happened this Monday, and just raising awareness about it in case anyone's interested.
Thank you. It's great to see that it's going forwards, and because maybe JupyterLab 4.4 will gain that feature. Okay, so next on the agenda is Constantine.
Hey, just a short announcement here that JupyterLab LaTeX extension is kind of back on track with the help of other members of community. Converted to extension templates and figured out how to release packages now. So that's all working. The latest release is finally compatible with JupyterLab 4. There's been a long drought of releases on PyPI. And also starting work on supporting different LaTeX engines. So you can see the issue there and sort of the list of engines that we're currently testing. If there is anything else that is not there and you would like to see better supported, drop a comment. I'll add it to the table and to the testing. Thanks.
Thank you a lot for maintaining that and making the release. It's great to be able to just pip install that. It will definitely make many people happy. Okay, it looks like this is the end of the agenda. Is there anything else that anyone would like to bring as a last minute item on the recording?
I've started looking into TypeDoc 026. It's somewhat selfishly so that we can deconflict marked, because 026 uses markdown it as opposed to marked, but it gives a more consistent behavior. In doing that, also looking at adding the ESLint plugin for TypeDoc, or it's TSDoc, which is the spec for doing TypeScript documentation. It's slightly different from JSDoc because Microsoft got to be different. But end goal of that is to have a more robust tool chain for building docs and all that stuff. And then circling back on getting to the newer Mermaid that has some nice new features. So no PR yet. Last I checked, I've got, let's see the number, 380 linter warnings. That includes our 7 or whatever ones about tests being commented out or something like that. Whatever, like they've been there for months, so I'm not going to try and fix those. But I am going to get it back down to what we're seeing on main. Main things I've uncovered there have been like, there's some stuff written in RST syntax with double ticks as opposed to single ticks. There's places where people use kind of more like C++ style documentation stuff, whatever. So just throwing a big hammer on it. We can talk about individual points once the linter's happy. The only downside of that is that every TypeDoc, which is the hard driver, supports more tags than are in the TSDoc spec. The spec is extensible, but every package that wants to be able to use, the different tags like @module is not in TSDoc. TypeDoc does support it. We rely on that. Integrity enforces it, all that kind of stuff. So, just managing those. Other thing is there's a bunch of broken links on every one of our READMEs when they actually get turned into the docs because they point to directories. They become actual files and they break. So probably looking at another TypeDoc extension to create fake files that fix that, because there's just no way that they're not going to line up right? Like we got to just accept that. So don't create a package called classes or modules or interfaces. That was a tough one, right? Don't do that. Namespaces, just, it's saying that we can't name packages after things that will already show up as top level directories in a TypeDoc build. Yeah, so that's about it. I'll get there when I get there.
I see some clapping emojis also and say to thank you for that. I understand that it's been long coming, and indeed it's also tricky for a developer to know in which style to write the documentation.
Right.
As you mentioned, that there is a couple of different styles. I guess in addition to having a linter, we might want to add a very small note on the documentation, if there isn't any. I know that there is a very common practice of just adding a heading with note, which then renders a little bit funny in TSDoc. We can also change that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the markdown change was like at the time. So TypeDoc, our TypeDoc is locked to marked 4.x, which has a bunch of ReDOS vulnerabilities and all that, and it's never going to be updated. It's never going to be fixed. They're already up on 14. We want 14. We want those features, and Mermaid now is going to have marked as well. So stuff's getting all nasty there. But yeah, I mean, like making docs less of a, well, we'll do what we can, to actually a concern that we can like gather metrics on and stuff like that. Because I think you can ask TypeDoc for, how much of my API surface is documented, right? Like we set a number and we just don't go lower than that number and we get better. We're not saying we need 100%. It's just don't make it worse, right? So, but yeah, I mean, the reason, like another ESLint plugin, but if you're using a full, IDE setup, if you're using JupyterLab LSP or something like that, getting that feedback as you type is the best time to get it. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else with last-minute items?
I can just raise one more doc thing. The way that read the docs is doing its stuff is changing. Historically, they injected a pip package that did stuff to your build. It sounds like now they're going to inject that as they host it. So they're putting in JavaScript and stuff like that. They're just going to take the static output of your site, look at it, do some things with it, and then inject like the version selector and all that kind of nonsense out of band, which is kind of crazy, right? Like, they want to put ads in there. They're just going to put ads in there, whatever. But like, we're not going to not use read the docs. So everybody's going to get opted into that in like October, even for old docs. So that'll be exciting.
Do you think we're going to have to do anything, Nick, or at least monitor anything to make sure we're not affected by this?
I mean, docs will just start breaking and we'll fix them. I mean, it happens all the time. Like pip changes something and the docs break. Like it is a sort of a monstrously complex system, and there isn't really a way to like really tighten them down. I think by not injecting dependencies, things will actually get a little bit better. And it's just like, are you generating good metadata? Are you building objects in and all that stuff? And if you're generating the quote unquote standard file outputs, I think it's going to probably work better for most builds, because it won't actually be like, we ran into this on something like we're using Flit, and Flit doesn't like it if you change a file in your Git repo, but Redox changed files, so it was complaining. So there should be less of that, which is a good goal. But they will be man-in-the-middling stuff. But it's also free and extremely good. Oh yeah, they're going to be showing diffs in your docs. Called Read the Docs Extras, which is amazing. What is it called? Extras? I think that's what they're calling it. Extras collection. I can't find it anymore. So there will be, again, probably with some fancy JavaScript, You'll drop into a PR, you'll go to the PR snapshot on read the docs, provided it builds, and then you'll get an overlay layer that shows you what changed between the two versions, which that's money. We want that, right? That's going to substantially improve the developer experience or the reviewer experience for docs. So I'm very excited about that.
Do you have a link to an announcement or a blog post about these upcoming changes?
Yeah, it was on Read the Docs blog. The thing is, it's really hard to look for things about Read the Docs itself because here we go. Read the Docs add-ons enabled by default. Here it is. Here is the blog post. October 7. That's when all of our stuff's going to stop breaking. Yeah, so we'll just find out. And you know, maybe that's a thing that I do on that docs PR, because they're tightly like it's already having a change conf.py because type doc creates some new files that we need to ignore and it copies more things. Somebody's referencing developer contributing RST in their code and it breaks things. We're just going to ignore that, and I'm not going to try and fix that. I'm just ignoring it and not going to let Sphinx complain. Yeah, so it's interesting read, and looking at the candy, looking at the carrot, I think outweighs the stick of injecting content into your. It's their host, right? Like it's free. They're giving it to us. If they want to put ads in there, we can go build it on GitLab pages or GitHub pages if we want to. But I think the value is going to be too great to ignore.
Yeah, I think JupyterLab used to build the documentation, or at least part of it, on GitHub pages, but it turned out to be not necessarily worth it. Okay, I see in the agenda that Rosie also added a point. Rosie, do you want to speak about it?
Yeah, thank you. I was just wanting to mention that I was interested. I was looking to release NB Classic. There were a few PRs that received some input from users. So there's one last PR that I was interested in including, and it addresses an issue that I linked there. If anybody else has a chance to look at, I think that issue, it also links to the PR as well. I think there was a problem rendering images. The handler that was the handler that was accepting the request is in Jupyter server. So when we updated the URL for NB Classic when Notebook 7 is installed, there was an issue there. So I submitted a PR. If there are no oppositions, I would be interested in releasing NB Classic with that PR included.
Thank you for doing that, and I saw that you also merged some other pull requests. That's great to see another NB Classic release.
Yeah, no problem. It's
will
still a lot of interest.
Yeah, the previous one, if I see correctly, was May 25th, so that was some time ago. Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I think another question that I just kind of came up was that I saw that there was a Python 3.13 coming in October, and I was just wondering more about how those Python releases are kind of received by JupyterLab in general, for testing purposes, as well as for kind of like what we say is maintained. I saw that there was an issue for Python 3.12 about I think if I can find it, but I saw there was a comment there by Jason that said that because the older JupyterLab versions were no longer maintained, the recommended route was to upgrade to JupyterLab 4. which does work with Python 3.12. So I was just a little bit more curious about the policy and if anybody can offer some insights.
Yeah, I don't
you
think
mean
Jupyter. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, the question was you mean just a Python version that you used to start JupyterLab, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think we just follow the regular Python schedule. So when there is a version that goes end of life, we just don't support it anymore. We remove it from the test metrics at least first. And then I think we also bump the version in the Py project at some point, but maybe not right after the end of life. Maybe there is a little bit of delay. It really depends if you still want to let people be able to install the package with an older version, but still saying that we don't support it anymore.
Yeah, in my experience, we've also gotten bitten by people using newer versions of Python. I just checked, and Python 3.13 is expected to come out less than a month from now. 3.8, as Nick points out in the chat, is approaching end of life. I mean, people are still going to keep using it, but if they file bugs saying, I have this problem when I use Python 3.8, we're probably not going to accept them unless they can also repro it with 3.9, 10, 11, 12, or soon 13. I mean, I just had a conversation earlier this week with someone who was running Python 3.6 or 3.7, and I had to tell them, like, if it doesn't work, you're not going to get first-party support for it. You can either have to upgrade or fix it yourself. But I don't think we document that anywhere, do we, Jeremy?
Yeah, good question. It's in the changelog for sure, but I don't know if we have a place in the docs that says. I think that usually the changelog entry is enough to communicate this, but and maybe it would make sense to always have somewhere that this is the minimum version we support. I don't know.
I think we're starting to be bit more by the lack of distutils, especially in older packages for Jupyter. I think the kernels I think a lot of the kernels now are breaking because of the removal of distutils. But yeah,
but like IPyKernel and IPython are already following the scientific computing Python steps. So they've already dropped, 3.9, right? I think 3.10 is the current bottom of that. So there's nothing. That's a won't fix from IPython land.
Yeah, I mean, we have similar issues sometimes in triage, where people say, I'm using, we had one recent issue that came in, someone saying, I'm having this problem, I'm using Mac OS 10.13, and I looked it up, and that hasn't received a security patch from the vendors since November 2020. So we don't have anything in the documentation that says you must use a new OS, but we do say that we only support officially the most recent version of 4 specifically named browsers, and that most recent version won't work on a 4-year out-of-date operating system. And we usually close those issues to say, like, until you can reproduce it with something that is more modern, we are not going to consider fixing it.
So regarding the original question, I think in the past there hasn't been a very strict discipline from the JupyterLab side on making sure that new versions run with the newly released Python immediately, partially because not like most people do not update the very day that the new Python is released, and also because JupyterLab is at the very end of the chain. So in order to run JupyterLab, Jupyter Client, Jupyter Server, and for most people, IPyKernel/IPython has to already run on these versions. And I think it would be very useful if you would like, if you had time, to open a draft pull request, which only adds the new 3.14 version to the testing matrix so that we can see how much breaks. I would suspect that it might not work out of the box, but at least we would be able to open issues in the downstream repositories. But then users might not upgrade yet just because their dependencies like pandas or numpy might not be ready. I'm not saying that they are not. I do not know, honestly. I know that last week Jupyter server and kernels meeting, there was some discussion about 3.13 coming. I don't see the details on that in the notes, but I am aware that the community is also looking on that in a larger context. So yeah,
I mean,
pull request
so
might be a good action item. Go ahead, Nick.
yeah, I haven't looked. So on CondaForge, we do it kind of slow. I mean, we're starting early because it's RC1, and RC1 is, you know, they promise they're not going to break the ABI again. But like, let's see here. How close are we there? So CondaForge is at 45% done of porting that. The issue, you know, when you get in, when you're expecting maintainers to build wheels on their CI for unreleased Python packages, they're just not going to do it, right? And they're certainly not going to do it, you know, like because we asked them to. That's the biggest thing. So if people are using lots of like really fancy stuff, there just aren't going to be wheels for their specific version. But now somehow they want to use a, you know, not yet released Python. So I have not yet validated whether we can build CondaForge, build the CondaForge spec build of JupyterLab. We won't have to because it's no arch. But eventually somebody's going to bring in a compiler, and it's going to, you know, we're gonna see what happens. So I guess like Lightning uses it. We'll find out pretty soon. Let's put it that way. We're going to find out pretty soon.
Thank you all for your input. I will definitely take you up on opening up a director on that and seeing what issues potentially arise there.
Yeah, and once there is a draft PR, if you open it before it is released, you can then, once it is released, a couple of days after that, close and reopen, and the CI will retrigger and will get like a more representative state of the ecosystem.
Okay, yeah, I will definitely do that. Thank
I mean,
you.
the other play altogether is to just use Python nightly. So that would now already be 3.13 because 3.12, or sorry, 3.14 because 3.13 is now in the RC channel. So it's no longer, there are no longer nightly builds of that. It's not bad to look a little bit further out, right? Because that's going to save someone some headaches, you know, further down the line. If we're testing against our oldest supported and our newest supported, that can be great.
So I'm not familiar with Python nightly. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. So if you go to actions, GitHub, set up GitHub, set up Python, GitHub, set up Python. All right. So your palette, the colors with which one might paint their acceptance, it's based on this. So the supported architectures is this other file that I always have to go look for every time. There's a list of it somewhere. Using the Python version input. Yeah. Semver ranges, download, hyphen ranges, X ranges, advanced range syntax, Semver. Anyhow, one of them in there is nightly.
Okay.
Let me see. What's the? Yeah, there we go. So they're just pi 39, pi. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know how to find it. Somewhere on that page, there's a link to the actual list of files that it actually supports.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But I can tell you right now that a lot of things aren't going to work.
Mm.
There will be no wheels, and then it'll try and build wheels, and that'll fail, or it'll take forever. So
Okay.
that's the danger with using the official releases, is there just won't be wheels for a lot of stuff. So like anything that uses Rust, no way. It took us months to get YPy stuff running after 3.12 came out. So it's just not feasible to add that to every CI run. But one PR, yeah, that's great. But it'll tell us what's broken.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for that discussion. If I may just add one more item to my agenda, as I wanted to call out file browser grid pull requests, and one of them is discussing the possibility of using a grid which would be applied to the entire listing, or inline grid which would apply to individual items but preserve the widths of each separate item in the file browser listing, or a table layout. And this is just to call it out in case if there are people with strong opinions before we merge one or the other or explore a third option. The details are in the pull request. It's number 16765, where you will find the most recent discussion.
Yeah, I really appreciate Mike doing a lot of research about this. I've been learning as I go. Mike is the author of one of the PRs. I'm the author of the other PR. Probably merge in at least one of them. I'll drop in the other pull request. There are, for those interested in accessibility, there is an accessibility angle to this as well. I was reading up on an article which I dropped into, I think 16765, that was talking about the kind of semantic meaning of a table versus a grid, which is also important for people who are using screen readers to navigate the file browser. There's no effective limit for how large a directory can be. So Mike's been doing some good research on performance implications when you have a very large directory as well. And that's something that we need to be mindful of, because we have people who are sometimes using this with very large directories. So please take a look at it. I believe this is tagged as a release blocker for 4.3.0, right? The current file browser issue.
Yeah, it is.
So we want to move forward on this as quickly as we can so as not to delay 4.3.0 any further.
Okay, and since 4.3 release update is in the additional discussion in the recorded section, that is a good time to transition off to the unrecorded part of the meeting. Brace yourselves.
Thank you for hosting.